You know what? Unpopular opinion, but sometimes one must say no to oneself. Welcome to Mother Academia. So if you are new here and you've not been a part of Mother Academia, the basic idea is that we mothers who are a little bit bookish and would love the chance to go to graduate school, but are busy with good things at home, have created our own courses of study in which we can continue to learn from our homes about the things we want to learn about. And often many of us have stolen direct courses of studies from lovely institutions like St. John's College all the way to Notre Dame. So basically we're stealing graduate degrees. I don't know if I should say that. We're submitting to other people's graduate degree programs. Maybe that's better. Anyways, in this series, I cover both the habits in order to continue learning from home and the self-education that we're pursuing, but also I troubleshoot and talk about classical ideas and principles that can come in and breathe life into your studies. Now, if you don't know, I actually have a Mother Academia cohort in Common House. It is a place where women can find camaraderie. Not everyone, shocker, is into studying hard old books at home alone, or dare I say dead languages, but there are many of them around the world, and most of them I think are in Common House, and we would love to have you join us. We also have our quarterly symposium call where it's a very convivial time of exchanging ideas, talking about the good habits or the bad habits of our Mother Academia, finding connections across the different things we're learning and reading about, and we'll have our next one here in just a little bit. So really excited about all of that. And the last thing I have to tell you about, because if you're watching this, you're probably a planner type, is that I have just recently put into Common House, it's not going in the shop, it's just going in Common House, my logbook template for next year. So I have a thing about all planning products geared towards homeschooling women. There are pretty aesthetically pleasing planning products, but they are not conducive to what we need as homeschool moms, right? And then the ones that are made for us seem so juvenile. And I hope no one's watching and makes those and feels attacked. But if you would like for me to give you some pointers, I would be happy to. Anyways, I had to make my own. One, I just needed to make it in a certain way where I could keep track of narrations, also reflections, also the subjects we have. I wanted little bubbles so I could check them off. Of course, I wanted to be able to keep up with my habit training. I wanted my mother culture or Mother Academia reading. I wanted meal planning. I wanted so many things. So I just went ahead and made a template, and anyone can tweak it to fit their life, because honestly, I don't think there's one perfect planner for every homeschool mom, so I've made a template. It's in Common House. Here's a look-see, and if you want to know more or have it, come join us. We have a lot of fun things in there. But today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about saying no to oneself. This is not a popular opinion generally in society today. However, we Mother Academics, as much as we might like these old, beautiful books, are still moderns, and even we struggle to say no to ourselves, particularly in the pursuit of a good thing. And I call this book Gluttony. We'll talk about it today. I'm also then on the second half of the video for those who are uniquely interested in how my Mother Academia is going, who like to see the Notion template, all of that. I will be updating it here today at the end. But to get started, why is it important that we learn to say no to ourselves? So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I have noticed that I am getting shiny book syndrome. This is not a surprise to me. I speak about book gluttony because I am a book glutton. I love a good thing in excess, and I want to shove it in, sort of like a food glutton, right? And so I've talked about book gluttony for a couple of years now, and the different ways you can temper it, how you can bring temperance, the virtue of temperance, into your life through certain practices and habits, and how you can kind of keep an eye on your literary life to make sure that you are not tipping into book gluttony. And it is very hard. It used to be hard because I would see other people reading certain things and want to also read those things. That's not necessarily bad, it's just not a right ordered love of learning and reading books. Now the problem is the footnotes. So as I read these great works, or as I read books about the great works, which I'm going to talk about one that I've particularly enjoyed for Dante's comedy, you can start falling into the footnote trap, where you want to read everything that's on the footnotes. This has been happening to me, in addition to my usual problem of just seeing other books that I want to read. And I had posed this question in the symposium, like, how do you decide when to pivot? Because pivoting is fine. It's the perk of doing your own Mother Academia, right? You're not in a graduate program where it's like, no, you must do it this way. You can say, actually, I thought I was gonna do this. I found an idea here I wanna pursue, and I'm just gonna pivot. That's the best part. But how do you decide, back to the question, when you'll pivot and when you don't. And the women in the group had a couple of ideas. They were really helpful. I'm one who's particularly struggling with the pivoting. And also I've been thinking about it because I've gotten a little off track with my reading. I've been reading a lot, but when I look at the notion, it doesn't feel like I'm reading in the direction I wanted to as much as I could have by this point. And again, that's fine. We have to be open-handed with these plans. You cannot make Mother Academia a blood covenant. If you do, you'll ignore your children, you'll ignore the work in your home, you'll be really fussy about your reading time. You can't do that. That won't lead to virtue. But there also has to be some sort of boundary to this pursuit. If you are serious about a course of study, if you really do want to accomplish certain things, you're going to have to say no to other things. And I think we homeschool moms in particular have the ability to be the queens in our houses about almost everything. This is how we're going to do school. This is going to be our daily rhythm. This is how I'm going to feed you, how I'm going to clothe you, the friends you'll have, the activities you'll do. And that makes us kind of sound like tyrants, but I think for most homeschool moms, it's in the pursuit of what is lovely and good. You're like, this will be a gift to my family, so I will work very hard to make it happen. It's a good thing about us moms. But I do think that then we get in the habit of thinking we can do whatever or have all the yeses. Here's what I've been doing with my books. When I run into a book that I would like to read that is not on my Mother Academia list, I have to do the 1 in, 1 out rule. If you have young kids, you probably know this for toys or books. To keep just the onslaught of things in your house to a respectable amount, right? Few things come in, a few things must go out. If you are going to buy yet another stuffed animal, then we must part with a stuffed animal, right? That sort of idea. I'm doing that with my books. I'm just doing it to myself. And so there have been things that I have said yes and no to. For instance, I talked about Davenant Hall. They kindly sponsored a video from Mother Academia recently. And I mentioned that I was going to take their early Christian worship class. I said yes to that. It is okay to me if I don't necessarily then mark off a book from my St. John's reading list, because the interest that I have in this course, the ability to study with someone I admire, Dr. Matthew Hoskin, that trumps necessarily reading alone like Sophocles. I mean, I finished my Sophocles reading, but you understand what I mean. Like if I don't get to Herodotus, I'll survive because I so enjoyed doing this class. But this class came with a bunch of new weekly readings for me to do. I'm not taking it for a grade, I'm auditing, so I guess I could not do the readings, but I want to learn, so I'm doing the readings. So I possibly traded out something. That's fine with me. There are other things that pop up. Like recently I read Dopamine Nation because 1,000 Hours Outside was talking about it with Jonathan Haidt. I like Jonathan Haidt. I've read a lot of his books. I like 1,000 Hours Outside. I'm also very interested in the neuroscience behind things like dopamine. I should have said no to reading that. Honestly, it wasn't worth a trade in my time. And that's where learning to say no comes in. I have to prioritize, make a hierarchy. Another thing moderns are very uncomfortable with, saying this is better than this. Either for me personally right now, I want to pursue classical studies, so this is going to be a higher priority, reading this book, reading Tacitus, than reading Dopamine Nation. If you have a lot of issues with like screen addiction or food addiction or other things, then Dopamine Nation might be a higher priority for you. But in with our own hierarchies there, I'm having to say no to certain things. And that means when a friend talks about a great book she just read that's about C.S. Lewis or something else that I love, I must command myself towards my original plan because it is something I want to do. And the thing about plans is we make them and we have this vision of the year and then somehow it's November. And we've not done the plan. We don't understand where the time went. My husband asked me what I did yesterday, and I wasn't quite sure. I couldn't remember because it was just a lot of little things in a lot of different directions. And that's just what happens when you don't have a path. Moms must be flexible. We must lay down our own preferences for the love of those in our home. It happens. We all know it. I don't need to tell you guys that. However, we also make plans so that we go in a certain way. I talked about this in my 2024 tools video, that your days make up your year. They make up your life, right? And so if we don't stick to the plan mostly, what you hoped for through this pursuit of Mother Academia isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen if every time I see a book recommendation on Instagram, I go get it and read it from the library. I'm not going to actually pursue my classical studies, my medieval studies, or my Latin, which we'll talk about Latin in a second. So we must learn to say no to ourselves, and the one in, one out rule is my tip for today from Mother Academia. Hopefully it is helpful to you. But from there, let's talk about some books that I've been reading, because some of them, oh my goodness, I think they might stand the test of time. But first, okay, so I was about to pull up the Notion, and then I remembered that I really wanted to talk about a particular resource. So one thing that I am reading this year is Dante's comedy, and I learned that divine comedy came about later. That's not how you ought to refer to it. But anyways, I am currently at the tail end of Purgatorio. And oh, you know what? There was another thing I wanted to talk about in this video, and that was the idea of liturgical reading. I'm so glad that we are remembering what I actually wanted to do today. So I have never read the Divine Comedy. I've read parts of the Inferno for school, like most people. However, it's my first time reading straight through. And for us, on our calendar, we are currently in Great Lent. We are about to go into Holy Week and then Bright Week. I did not realize that the Divine Comedy begins on Holy Friday and goes through Easter. And so I now think this might be a yearly Lent into Bright Week read, even Eastertide, because it gives you, the bonus 50 days. But what a tremendous thing to read. Let's just say that the Divine Comedy has put my soul into conversation with itself about things I have never faced or thought about. I think this book is maybe one of the greatest ever written. There might be a reason why we are still talking about it today. But I wanted to talk about a couple things in it that really surprised me. And I know sometimes listeners, viewers have asked me about. And so I wanted to touch on one thing about Odysseus in particular. And then I want to talk about a resource I'm using for this. So first off, Odysseus. He's the Homeric hero, right? Like he's in the Odyssey. You travel with him to the Trojan War and then in the 10-year travels to get home to Ithaca, to his wife Penelope, and to his son Telemachus. Now, if you've watched my classical feminine ideal types, Penelope is one of the best. Love Penelope. We were reading this year for school, Tales of Troy and Greece, as well as we now have the children's Odyssey, the children's Homer's Odyssey. I can't remember the full title, but we have both of those. So my kids are entering into the world of the epic, right? The Homeric epic. And my daughter in particular also loves Penelope. It's just hard not to. I struggle with Odysseus as a hero. I understand that he is, he's brave, he's cunning, which I don't think cunning is necessarily a good thing. It means deceptive in your wit and in your cleverness. However, he is I understand why men might like him. He's adventurous, he fights Cyclops, he's also very prideful, and he brags to Cyclops about his name. I don't find him to be that attractive as a hero. And I know other people have commented on my pieces before when I mentioned the Odyssey that they don't like Odysseus either, or Ulysses, it's the same guy. And I've not really known how to get into the conversation other than saying, yeah, I don't like him either, but what's wrong with me is my question. When something's been held up as an ideal for thousands of years and people have studied it and it's worked its way into philosophy and it's worked its way into literature and it's part of it's not our social imaginary, but it is part of other social imaginaries and it does feed into our time. And most people know about the Odyssey, even if they've not read it, still in that way commonplace. So color me a color. I don't even know what that phrase really means. Color me something when I found Odysseus in Dante's Inferno. For a second, I just thought, someone else doesn't like him too. But it's because of his vain glory and wanderlust. Like, ultimately, he does not put himself into the community he needs to be in order to grow in virtue. He has all these great things, these great ideals, but his wanderlust, also his insane amount of adultery, and they keep him from the shores of Purgatorio. Like, he sees the mountain and he somehow his ship just goes under, as he tells Odysseus, or as he tells Dante. And so that was a very interesting thing, one, just as someone who has struggled with Odysseus, then to find his fault that actually kept him from the ability to repent and go to God. It sounds weird to be like, I'm super glad I found someone in Dante's hell. I know, but do you understand what I'm saying? But also to find myself entering into the great conversation. I've read the Odyssey. I found him here. I know how other people have used him as an example. And I think that's an encouraging thing about Mother Academia or just your studies in general. And I've heard from Common House members that the first time they read this poem or they tried to read this book I had recommended, they didn't get it. You feel really ill-equipped going into parts of this conversation. You can't sit at the big guys table yet, right? Like you're still at the kids table, or you're really just like over on the blanket in the corner. And then you study for a bit and you go back to that thing, or you read a new thing that mentions the ideas you didn't understand before, and you realize, oh, I'm holding my own. I'm actually understanding what is being said. And that's really exciting. That's really encouraging. And if you are experiencing that at this point in your Mother Academia, I'm so happy. And if you're struggling, you're feeling like, wow, it's a little over my head, it comes. So keep going. You also need a faithful guide and friend. So I, right now, am reading as I want in the book, and then I follow it up with Dr. Baxter's A Beginner's Guide to the Comedy. I have an interview with Dr. Baxter later this podcast season. I cannot wait for you to hear it. It's about the medieval mind of my favorite storyteller. And it was the interview that as I was listening to him, I'd be sitting there like, oh, this is so lovely. I love these ideas. And then be like, oh my goodness, I have to ask a follow-up question. Where's my head going right now? I just wanted to like listen and just sit with all of his answers and think about the medieval mind. So this book has been amazing. Like I said, I read it after I read Dante. So I go to Dante first, I narrate Dante, I feel like I understand it, and then I get all the depth and connections and seeds from Baxter's book, because I've never read through the comedy all the way. I don't know that Dante is like taking something here and he's gonna thread it all the way through to Paradiso. Paradiso. I don't know that yet. I'm going to miss that because I'm not gonna remember that small detail probably. And this is where Dr. Baxter's book really shines. He somehow does not lose any of the depth and beauty for the sake of accessibility. Not at all. I bet he is a tremendous professor. Like I would love to take a class with him. So I highly recommend this book if you were thinking about reading Dante. And then you'll see on my list here that I also have an entire Hillsdale course that's free. You can take a lot of free courses from them, but I'm going to listen to it in full after I finish these two. So I have a guide while I'm reading, and then I have a guide at the end to kind of do the whole thing at once. I just really wanted to talk to you about the Divine Comedy today. Okay, so I learned last time that you pause my video and read these things in depth because someone asked me about a parenting book I read at the beginning of the year that the title alone would send many a Christian running. It's called Good Inside. I defended my read of it in those comments and ultimately defined what good inside means because it's not exactly what you are panicked about. But now I know you guys pause and read. So let's get started. Okay, what I did this time is I did put my end dates for my reading that I finished in here, but I didn't switch them over to done because then I would probably remember what I did. So far we have finished The Inferno. We can check that one off. I also finished, Swallowdale. Yes, no, we did finish Swallowdale. So I talked about my read alouds. I put them in here as well. If you are looking for a great list for read alouds, I recommend John Senior's 1000 Good Books list. I've recommended this so many times, but even my husband is pulling from that list for his read alouds at bedtime with my kids. So we just kind of keep working through it, and that's a great place to start. I have never read Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie, but someone mentioned that it was based on Andrew Kern's idea of Scholé, and Dr. Christopher Perrin wrote the foreword. It was excellent. I got it from the library. I think I read it in a day. It had so much deep philosophical wisdom, but written in such a mother-friendly tone. It'd be a great read for anyone this summer. So that was one of those that I probably should have said no to in terms of my one for one, but I did get it and I really enjoyed it, and now I would recommend it to anyone. So that was one that I finished. Okay, I talked about Dopamine Nation. I need to give a warner on Dopamine Nation. So I'm someone who I'm not very up to date on neuroscience or anything, but for a long time I wanted to be a neurologist. So the brain fascinates me, the way things impact it, the way it works, things like trauma impact, stuff like that is just interesting to me. And I've also been interested in addiction for a long time because of familial things. And so when I saw Dopamine Nation, I thought it was going to be more about dopamine's effect in the brain and how addiction, and I was thinking more broadly, and I was probably also thinking screen, how it impacts children, adults. And I hoped in reading it that I would learn more about dopamine and then just consider the other ways my children get a lot of dopamine hits just naturally in our life, not necessarily from screens, but other ways, because there's like a fulcrum and there has to be homeostasis in your mind. So if you have a dopamine hit, you have to come down. Like you have have to. And that's why social media crashes can be really hard, or TV binges can be really hard for adults or children. This book was very intense. I give that warning almost so much that I took it off the Notion so no one would see it, because I was highly uncomfortable reading certain stories from the book that deal with certain types of addictions. I did not expect it to go where it went. The science behind it, what the counselor, the clinician was talking about was very interesting, but the stories were very graphic and very hard to read. So I give you that warning so that you don't just like pick it up or leave it out and have young readers around your house who could possibly pick it up. Definitely don't do that. Absolutely not. Okay, then I have my early Christian worship stuff. So I've been reading along. I have to actually add a couple more in from last week, was week 2. So I've been reading along with my class, and that was worth saying no to something else. Then we finished The Silver Trumpet by Owen Barfield with my kids. I finished Leave It to Smith. I love Woodhouse. And we also finished Heidi. So you'll see that I'm still making like decent progress, I think. For a year's worth of reading, I don't feel like I've been wasting my time or getting too distracted, but I can also feel a little bit like I added in Jesus Through Medieval Eyes, Something They Will Not Forget, Good Inside, the Classroom Catechism webinar, Teaching from Rest, Dopamine, that entire class that I added. So there are just certain things that I am getting distracted by, and I'm hoping this summer to just focus in a little bit more. Partly because my stuff from St. John's is considered the summer cohort, so it's what they read for their summer term for those who are completing their degree just over the summers. And I kind of just want to see if I can keep that pace. Why? I don't know. I'm just curious. So we'll see what happens there. As for where I'm going next, I do need to wrap up a couple things. So obviously I'm reading Baxter's book along with the Divine Comedy. Those will finish at the same time. This is just a parenting book that I'm in right now. I'm always kind of reading a parenting book, and I am comfortable with that. Like, we always just have these ideas and conversations going on in our house because little kids are mysteries. Total mysteries sometimes. Winters in the World is also one I'm reading throughout the year. I need to read the spring section. Let's see here. I'll probably finish the Odyssey next. I'm just struggling to want to get back to Confessions, if we're being honest, and I hope that's encouraging to you if you are trying to read some of the more highly praised classics and you're not just loving them. I've read Confessions before, as I mentioned, when I like stumbled over my words about being like, I'll just fly through it. But I read it and I liked it, but I'm not like dying to get back to it. That's where I'm at. You have to be honest. Reality demands honesty. Okay, so where I'm gonna go next though, I was thinking about picking up, let's see, where'd it go? Okay, I talked about this last time. Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I would like to do another history read. I have a history degree for my undergraduate degree, so I actually really just enjoy reading history. And then I would like to maybe get into David Hume. I think that's where I was going next. Oh, what is down here? Oh, Shakespeare I actually did finish. Okay, we can move. I listened, I watched a play. I watched King Lear. So that's where I'm gonna go next. Let me know where you're gonna go next. If you're having troubles, or if you found that you were also having shiny book syndrome, or any of the other things that we often talk about in this Mother Academia series, let me know. Otherwise, happy reading and happy studying. Hats off to you.